السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started since 8 o'clock. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So this is Islam 201 class. It's normally on our Sunday schedule. This week we're going to talk about the eventful first week of the new presidency. So inshallah try to summarize some of the things that were done, but it really was too many things to talk about in great detail about every topic. So I was looking back at my talk we did, kind of looking forward in December about the new year and what would be coming. And you know, if any of you were there or reflect back on that time, you'll see that there was a considerable amount of what was done in the first week was in, at least in bare bones or in some form in this project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation. And certainly, you know, just broadly looking at this new administration compared to the last time they were in power, one thing you can say for sure is that they are much more organized and moving much more rapidly. I think one lesson they learned from the last time they were in power was just how little time there is to get some things done, especially since there's another election that comes in about a year and maybe 9 months. So basically the election cycle, you're on the clock. And so you can see from the speed at which they were moving really that they learned that lesson. So we're going to talk about some of the areas and different areas that this administration has sort of already started acting. Now the first thing, of course, was the ceasefire in Gaza. And for sure, this started during the Biden administration, obviously, but you know, all the analysis of this was that it was only Trump that really was able to force this through. His envoy, as one Israeli negotiator said, it only happened in the end because Trump came along and Trump told Netanyahu to do it. This is an Israeli negotiator. He was a seasoned Israeli negotiator who had been involved with previous hostage negotiations. This is what he said. And what Trump himself said, he was on a radio show, he says, Biden didn't do anything. He says, if I didn't do this, if we didn't get involved, the hostages would never be out. And I think, you know, he is boastful and says a lot of things which are probably arrogant, but in this particular, you know, instance, for sure, that was one of his achievements. Of course, you know, at the same time, he canceled sanctions on certain settler groups that the Biden administration had put sanctions on them for violence against the Palestinians in the West Bank. And you heard him this weekend saying that he thinks that maybe they should empty out Gaza and send the people to Egypt or Jordan or some third country. And of course, you know, he has to please both sides or of this party that he has. In fact, this is just echoing certain ideas that the, you know, like the far right in Israel have been saying. And, you know, it's not fleshed out, it's just sort of he threw it out there. I don't know, I don't think this is very serious. Egypt and Jordan already had spoken against it. And we hope, inshallah, there's, Qatar had mentioned that they blocked people going back to their house in North Gaza, but that there was a deal that was reached to allow them to go there this week once another hostage has been released. So, you know, that's some of what has happened. Also, he lifted the temporary hold that the Biden administration put on 2,000-pound bombs to be sent to Israel. So he also lifted that. So, you know, there's not a uniform way to look at Trump in terms of Israel, other than for sure he can force and he was the only one who was able to force Netanyahu to do certain things. Just continuing in the foreign policy realm, he redesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. He paused all U.S. Foreign development and aid. Now, there was initially some thought that he had exempted Israel and Ukraine from this pause. Now there's some people are saying that maybe Ukraine was not exempted from the pause. So this is still a little bit unclear. Most of what actions he took in the first week were really all executive orders. They're basically just what the president writes, over time, this used to be not a very powerful way of doing things, but over time, presidents have asserted more and more power through executive orders. So executive orders have been one way they can do something unilaterally. It doesn't require any legislation. So presidents have been using it, both Democrat and Republicans, a lot more compared to the past. So most of what he did in the first week were really these executive orders. Now, some of them won't go anywhere because they violate the law. They're against existing laws. Some of them are just statements. We want to be the best in this, or they're not really all substantial. So we won't go into them all in detail, but some of them have very specific consequences. So this one, 90 days, there's a review and pause of all aid. They also suspended the U.S. from being part of a global tax deal. This was a negotiated kind of tax idea between the Europeans and the Americans to try and make sure every company pays a minimum corporate tax. Because, as you can see, you have one place has 0 tax, one place has 20%. So all the companies will suddenly start registering in that place that has 0 tax. So this is what they were trying to avoid. This is why Apple had to pay a significant amount of tax, because they tried to play that game with Ireland. They incorporated in Ireland to try to avoid certain European taxes, and the Europeans hit them with taxes anyway. So they said this was not allowed. But this is what corporations play as far as these games. But the U.S. has withdrawn from this agreement. They also withdrew the U.S. from the World Health Organization. Now, you might ask, why the World Health Organization? But this was part of the Republican effort against COVID. So basically, they felt like there was this large conspiracy of COVID-19, and there was a lot of things that the World Health Organization hid from people, and there was deficiencies, and so there was a series of basically executive orders and actions that were all COVID-19 related. They basically canceled a bunch of old COVID-19 directives from the government, and part of that was to get out of the World Health Organization. Now he's also issued an executive order to find some similar organization that you can work with that have similar aims, but who knows what that would be. That's just but at any rate, that happened. They also withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, and this is a climate agreement which was negotiated in the entire world, basically, about emissions and targets related to carbon dioxide. Overall, what you can see from everything that has been, that Trump has exited the U.S. from, it's what we talked about last year, is that this administration will make the U.S. increasingly less multilateral and will act more unilaterally. And you can see that in all of the actions that they've done. They've angered the Europeans. Trump is obsessed with Greenland. He wants to take Greenland from Denmark. And the Greenland people said, well, you used to have a base here anyway, and then you left. You didn't find it to be much. And Greenland is perplexed and doesn't know what to do, because they're saying, you can stay here all you want. If you want to put a base here, you want to, so they don't understand why he wants to buy Greenland in the first place, or why, and of course it made Denmark angry and Greenland angry, and nobody wants that to go forward. But that is, these are all parts of this overall new mindset of the US government during this administration, which will be this unilateral action. We're going to do things America first. We're going to withdraw from all these multilateral organizations. And ultimately, in my view, it's sort of an abdication of US leadership role. And so all of these things really came from the US at some point. I mean, this is what is ridiculous, is that he's withdrawing from these organizations which the US helped create in the first place. And so when they're getting out of these organizations, it's again a contraction of US influence, contraction of US leadership. Now, what will that mean for the world? This is an interesting thing to speculate on, because obviously when you leave a space, you create a vacuum, and other people will step in. So, you know, they're creating a world in the future where maybe the Europeans will be leading in climate and all these other topics from which they are retreating, because the world still looks to some kind of central body for health organization, health leadership, energy leadership. And if the US is not going to provide it, then somebody else will step in. But that is, every one of these things, the actions they've taken is unilateral in posture. And it continues in the immigration realm, because you saw that they have started sending military aircraft full of deportees to certain countries. Colombia refused to accept a plane of these deportees from the US, and Trump already put 25% tariff on them, and also other restrictions on trade and so on and so forth. So, one of the biggest things that he did with regards to immigration, and we knew that this was going to be a focus of this administration, was he declared it to be an invasion. So when, you know, normally there's a law in the United States, it's called posse comitatus. It means that the military cannot deploy in a civilian role inside of the United States. You know, the domestic law enforcement and domestic security is for domestic agencies, not for the military. But by declaring immigration to be an invasion, you know, he's claiming that this basically is a war. And then this war has to be fought with military. So that's why he is asserting that he can use the military as to do all these things. And in fact, that's what they've already started doing. These deportation flights were on military aircraft. I mean, they weren't commercial aircraft, which is the normal deportation is on commercial aircraft. And they've already started, you know, deploying at the border. There's a series of other things. He ordered that the U.S. military serve as immigration and border enforcement officers, and that they basically work with Homeland Security hand in hand to create a task force. There's something called a Homeland Security Task Force that he wants all 50 states to create. And it says its task is ending the presence of criminal cartels, foreign gangs, and transnational criminal organizations. So he also declared drug gangs to be terrorist organizations. So this is, again, militarization of this same concept. There was a bunch of other things that were done at the same time. The thing that was most interesting to me, which I mentioned in December, was that they are very interested in ending what's called birthright citizenship. And this was something that Stephen Miller, who was in charge of this whole immigration business for the last administration and is back for this administration as well, one of his key ideas was that this is not something protected by the Constitution. So basically the Constitution says anyone who's under the jurisdiction of the United States and is born in the jurisdiction of the United States is automatically a citizen. Now, that's always been understood to mean anybody basically born in the United States is a U.S. citizen automatically. But they are trying to claim that if you are here illegally, you're technically not under the jurisdiction, or you're not under this, the control of the United States. You're here, or even So what the text, basically the executive order, what they've said is that if you're born to a mother who is here temporarily, like on a student visa or tourist visa, and not a green card holder or citizen, then you are not, according to their order, automatically granted citizenship. And the other way, if the father is an illegal immigrant, and I believe if both of them are not here legally, then they also, their children would not qualify for citizenship. Now, this was already put on hold. A federal judge declared it to be unconstitutional. But that was always their goal. Their goal is that they knew that this was not going to be upheld on a lower level. But the point of them is to get this to the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court can act and declare their opinion on the matter, and then by that method have this become permanent law. And of course, the Supreme Court is controlled heavily by the Republicans, and they have a strong majority. So that is their hope, with this change. So that's one of the biggest changes. And now, other things, as you can see, they've basically made it that there's no safe space. Used to be churches. You could go in a sanctuary in a church if you were here undocumented as an immigrant. And the idea was they didn't want to, basically go into churches as law enforcement and just start snatching people during a church service. And so there were issues like that, but they had basically, as part of this executive order and a series of decisions this week, he said there's no safe place. And many of the church leaders, they already said they would comply with this executive order. I saw one sort of right-wing church leader. He said, well, it would be troublesome if they came during church service, but otherwise, he said, it's not going to be a problem. So essentially, we had a bunch of support from the Latino population for Trump during this last election. And you wonder where it's going to go in the next election, because what happens, you say, okay, well, they're just catching the undocumented people and so on and so forth. But in fact, they catch many people who have documents. They're U.S. citizens, they are green card holders, they have this large dragnet. Many times it's happened where they sent them overseas and then they have trouble to get back, and eventually at expense to themselves, they have to somehow find themselves to get back to the United States. So, it just sort of opens it up to the military now, because they're involved, the Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement. Who are they going to be looking for? I mean, they're going to be looking for brown people, basically. And so, this is a kind of a license to basically harass anyone, and unfortunately, that's where we're going to be heading, and who knows where that will end. So that's just some of what's happened on immigration. One interesting thing was that there were certain countries that refused to acknowledge their own citizens. India was one of the biggest culprits in this regard. So somebody came here illegally across the border from India. They have to identify where they're from, and then those people have to take their citizens back. So this is how it would work. And India wouldn't acknowledge their own citizens, and so they had no choice but to just leave them here, and they gave them work permit, and then they just live here in the United States, because even though they were here illegally, but they have no country that acknowledges them. So part of what Trump did with one executive order was that he's going to punish any of these countries that don't help out by acknowledging their own citizens. So India already made a statement about this, that they were going to change their policy and suddenly start to acknowledge their own citizens. So there was this whole, that may not have stood out to you, but this was happening in the background with some countries, and India was definitely the biggest culprit of that. I think that was all I can. Yeah, I mean, there was other things with immigration. You know, they canceled a app for the Customs and Border Patrol, which people could use to apply for asylum and stay in the United States. They stopped certain countries where they would, if they're, you know, if you're from Cuba and you're here, but you have family who is a permanent resident or citizen, they would let you stay. That's called what they call paroling. They ended that policy, and so they've done a lot of things. Basically, turned this immigration business into a war. Already, Trump is mentioned. I saw this today. He was angry that not enough people have been rounded up. You know, because he's trying to. He wants more people to be rounded up. I mean, it's a difficult job to do. But and of course, what's going to happen is, you know, many of these farm areas, because after all, where are these people? Where are they finding jobs? They're finding jobs as farm hands and people that are working in construction, people that are, you know, these kinds of jobs where people are not as strict looking at documents. And of course, then what's going to happen? Increased price of produce, increased price of construction, increased price of all the things that, and more inflation. So, you know, we already, the price of eggs went up since the president came, not down. So inflation didn't suddenly go down. So that was on immigration, and it's really a topic which is too broad to really discuss in detail. But it is definitely one of the major agenda items of this administration. International trade. So Trump came to power talking about tariffs, and he made, you know, really his own people are sort of brainwashed into thinking somehow tariffs are going to pay for everything in the United States. This is how, you know, how the people are thinking. I've seen people interviewed, and that's what they really believe it. You know, they really believe that these tariffs will pay for everything. Of course, tariffs don't pay for anything. They just increase the price of goods to us, and it's passed on to the consumer, and this causes more inflation. So it doesn't really help us in any way, but you know, you heard a lot about tariffs, but day one, first week, no tariffs. You know, there was no, other than on Colombia for refusing to cooperate on immigration, and it's because there was a lot of talk about it, but any tariff that you get set up, the other country will set up an opposite tariff. So it's not so easy as they've been led to believe. And certainly, like the people that were told this, I mean, it's obviously was a kind of foolish thing that he fooled people on. But we'll see what happens with tariffs. But trade, so far, nothing has happened in any substantial way. And already, you know, everybody that they threatened with tariffs, whether it was Canada or Europe, or I mean, they've all threatened to sanction back, you know, the United States. So it really didn't amount to anything other than talk so far. We talked about climate a little bit in the beginning. I told that the U.S. had withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accords, but they also, you know, basically repositioned the government as to what kinds of energy they are going to support. So what they kicked out from the basket was wind and solar. There was nothing mentioned about either of those two. In fact, wind was canceled. Like there was actually officially there were wind projects off the coast of North Carolina that were scheduled to be starting, but they were canceled because that was part of the executive order canceling all wind off the outer continental shelf. So that's where these things were going to be put. And I don't know, obviously, you know, the emphasis is going to be on coal, oil, biogas, nuclear. These are the kinds of energies that the Trump administration is going to promote. But, I mean, he has a bizarre kind of antithesis to wind. I don't know why. You know, even during the, I mean, it doesn't cost much. It doesn't add much to the grid either. But it's, you know, he was talking about birds, and it's bad for the birds. And I'm not sure why he is so much against wind. It doesn't really make much sense. But only if you think of it from a point of view that he wants to emphasize the need for more drilling, more oil, more gas, all of these things that we mentioned. And along with some of the executive orders, he reversed some of the restrictions in Alaska for drilling. and expanded more opportunities for drilling and gas exploration in Alaska. So there's going to be a lot more drilling and old energies. Along with that, I will mention that you might have heard this thing about artificial intelligence, Stargate, right? So Stargate was the term they put on for this, which was basically $500 billion they want to put as an artificial intelligence initiative. Why I mentioned that with energy is because AI requires large amounts of energy. Those AI servers, they're just energy, they drain so much energy, they can drain 30% of the energy from a nuclear power plant. I mean, this is how much energy they require. And so it's not a small amount. When you think about AI, and it really is going to require a lot of energy. And so what they've proposed is that they don't attach to the grid. They put these AI centers right next to the power plant. So they attack directly into the power plant and get the energy that way. Of course, the grid operators are against this, but the part of the executive orders were about how do we make this faster? We facilitate it, and we get the regulatory approval for that. So there is an idea of small nuclear power plants. We have Brother Hashem's not here today. This is his specialty. We should get and talk about that. But there's some smaller nuclear power plants that are newer design, and they can use degraded uranium and plutonium, I think, which is basically the byproducts from the normal nuclear power plant. And you can make a smaller reactor. And so they're promoting these as kinds of, you'll build the reactor and then you'll have the data center next to it to power it. So power really has a lot to do with AI. The other part of AI, of course, is, and Larry Ellison, who's the head of Oracle, was talking about this, was that, what they want is some kind of similar vision to what China has already, which is a lot of cameras and AI is basically tracking you all the time. And it automatically knows if you've committed some crime, and then it's sort of like just like a movie, either it sends you the ticket or the robot or the something happens. This is what the future vision that he had for AI that he mentioned. He mentioned it very clearly in his speech, and he's one of the members. They're one of the members of this initiative. It's private companies that signed on to give money for this initiative. So. Tesla was not one of them, and of course he was angry a little bit about that. He said these are companies, they don't have the money for it. I don't think they have enough money, and Microsoft was one of them, and he says, I have my 89 billion. He said, I'm good for it. So they're already fighting over this amongst themselves. But I think in the future, unfortunately, we have increasingly this kind of dystopian future where you'll be tracked all the time. And AI will be managing much of our behavior. And that's their vision. I mean, this is kind of like what they're promoting. Some things that certainly Muslims would probably support broadly is that, in some ways, but not in all the ways, is the attack on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. This is what DEI stands for. And it basically is, corporate culture and government culture, it has a lot of overlap, and you establish a culture based on what you pursue in hiring, how you manage your human resources department, what values you say you stand for, and how you promote and hire people in your organization. And DEI was one of the pillars of that, and so it was something that annoyed, definitely white Americans because they're not in the diversity spectrum, but also many of us, it became a way to promote certain types of gender ideology and create an environment in your workplace where you really couldn't speak about anything against gender ideology because it would automatically endanger you as a student, as an employee, as so on and so forth. This was one of the major actions the Trump administration did take this week, was basically cancel DEI from federal government and impose sanctions against other companies that are doing DEI. So along with the federal government doing their actions, many of the private companies also suddenly closed their DEI departments, closed their DEI offices, closed, and Trump has basically told the federal government, the people that employ all the federal employees, to make a new statement or a new policy about how they're going to hire, who they're going to hire, and so they eliminate all the DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion criteria, and make it just about who is the best, who will support the United States in their mission. He also started these DOGE teams, D-O-G-E, Department of Government Efficiency, which Elon Musk is supposed to head, but he basically declared that all the different departments of the government, each one has to establish their own DOGE team, which will then report to Elon Musk, and then they will, along with that, try to find some efficiencies. So that's happening. There's a lot of concern about federal employees. Trump fired a bunch of inspector generals, which these are the independent government employees that are supposed to have oversight over agencies to say if this agency is doing something against the Constitution or against federal law, and so they're basically, during the last administration, they were the ones who often criticized Trump and administration for doing things wrong. And so this time around, Trump said, let's get rid of these people. And of course, he did it illegally. You're not allowed to just get rid of people because there's specific law that it has to go to Congress. Congress has to okay who inspector generals cannot be just fired. They have to be fired with some cause or reason, and the Congress has to approve that. So already, I'm not sure how this is going to stick because these are definitely illegal actions that he took. But this is as you learned from Trump 1.0, he doesn't mind doing things that are against the law because then you challenge him in court, and so it's the point of he doesn't mind fighting about these things. And so that happened as well, and also efforts to limit some of the protections for employees. And the higher level, what they call executive level federal employees, these are the people who worked in the federal government their whole career and they became executive level employees. They're trying to make these people as presidential oversight, meaning that right now they're in the federal government employee oversight. So for that, to get fired as a federal government employee, you have to go through this committee and that committee and this, it really takes, and most of the time it won't happen, at the end of the day, so it's, there's a lot of protections for federal employees. And so they want to somehow remove these protections and to allow them to fire and hire anybody even at these top levels. And so that really they learned from the last time they were in power that these top level employees can really cause them a lot of problems because they're not some people who just rubber stamp everything. They're actually professional employees. And I mean, they're professionals. They're not technically politically motivated or shouldn't be. And they said, they issued a statement that all government employees have to implement the administration policies, meaning that you don't have to support the president politically or personally, but you have to implement his policies. Again, another way of trying to make sure whatever the president says, suddenly all the agencies are doing as well, because there was a lot of impediments in the past for Trump to get stuff done. Changes, we talked about DEI, we talked about federal workers, and there was not much on healthcare other than the WHO withdrawal, but there is, everything else on healthcare really requires laws, so we'll see what the Congress comes up with as far as Medicaid, Medicare, and other healthcare laws. He pardoned all of the people involved in the January 6th riot, and that was hundreds of people, some of them were still pending, being prosecuted. And he basically tasked the Attorney General with investigating all the agencies and how they may or may not have weaponized their agencies against Trump in the first place, meaning trying to, what happened during the last, when Biden was elected, there was, Facebook was upvoting and downvoting certain topics. And they were, a lot of these media companies, they were, for example, the Biden laptop news story. Suddenly, it evaporated from, social media before the election. Republicans were hopeful that would tip the election for them. So they definitely manipulated, and they continue to manipulate, as we see with Gaza. They manipulate stories many different ways to make sure that they are not heard. And so Trump, from his side, has said, we need to investigate that, how they did it against us. And in the view of this is for free speech. But of course, they're not as favor of free speech either. I mean, frankly, both sides would like to restrict speech, and they have already taken some actions in that regard for students on campuses and other areas where they have acted against Muslim voices, and they will continue to do so. But he is doing this investigation, which he promised to do, into how certain organizations basically downgraded his message during the last election. And this inauguration, as you saw, was much different from the last inauguration. All the tech executives were there. They were all in the line, in a row, and they were all ready to go. They're supporting him not only 200%, not 100%. And they basically already implemented some of the changes that he wanted, which is getting rid of DEI from their human resources and employment and all their, basically just stripping it entirely from the companies, and also getting rid of these people who were up-regulating and down-regulating certain stories related to Republicans. Now, of course, they have other, this is Facebook, has its own AI and their own ways of manipulating people, which is very sophisticated, so it doesn't require that same level anymore. But that is a very big difference you see in this administration compared to the last one, is that everybody is now, he's no longer somebody very strange or somebody like you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. It became much more acceptable to be associated with, and in fact, all the people who were secretly associating with him are now out in the open. Yeah, and they became statesmen, and so there's a whole different vibe you get from this administration, and already, we'll see. Even from the musicians who came to perform at the inauguration, he had a hard time getting people the last time. This time, so many people wanted to perform because it became much more mainstream, really, frankly. So, big difference in this administration. And that's just 1 week. So I didn't even mention all the things. There's, probably yeah, just for the people listening online, Brother Khalid was saying that this is crony capitalism at its best, and that the people that will be affected will be the people at the margins, the people with, already poor, already don't have much representation, and that's, of course, correct. This is, all the capitalists are there, and they're, if you look at the proposed tax changes, everybody will pay more taxes except for the top tax bracket, which suddenly will have a less tax bracket. So, they already, every capitalist is there with his wish list, and he's there getting Trump to, getting on Trump's good side to see if they can get that done. So I think that's what you can expect for 4 years. There was some interesting confirmation battles that were happening. I forgot to mention. Already happened in the first week. This guy, defense secretary, was narrowly approved. Pete Hegseth, I forget how to say his last name, but the vice president had to cast the deciding vote because he didn't get enough votes from his own side to pass him. And of course, he has some crazy things he's done. He's really not very qualified, but he was a strong Trump supporter, so So he got him passed. I mean, now that was one that was on the border. The other one was this fellow with the sex crimes thing, and he withdrew his name early on. So those are the two that were the most challenging that were going to be for Trump to pass, and one of them obviously withdrew, and the other one narrowly passed. And the rest of them are much more likely to be passed more easily. So any questions, any comments? I mean, I think this is a good time for comments because really, you guys are living in this just like me and watching like it's a reality show. But anything you guys have felt from the first week or anything anybody wanted to say? Where do you get the news from? Everywhere, you know. You can't rely on one source when you're looking at news. You know, you want to check Republican, international sources, national sources, security, you know, think tanks, because they also have good news sources. So I think you have to spread yourself quite broadly. There's an organization, Semaphore, which is interesting. If you ever go on there, they give you a daily news brief. So I don't think you should rely on one source. Don't just put Al Jazeera on all day long. You know, I think they have good news, but you know, every news source has a sort of bias. So you have to, you know, even I read Times of Israel. I mean, it's a Zionist, but they have their own viewpoint, and sometimes much more accurate in some ways than some places. You know, so you can't stick to one source if you want to really understand the world. You'll just have a big blind spot. So. You know, but if you're starting out, you know, obviously the mainstream things are okay, but you know, they will obviously, every one of them has its bias. So AP News, Reuters are more professional. You know, I would say those are where most people get their news, all the newspapers. The New York Times, Washington Post, you know, as you can see, they have biases, you know, but even AP and Reuters have biases, so you have to be careful to understand each one of these things. Yeah, I know you said exempted Israel. I didn't know about Egypt, but so Najee's saying that the exemption, so the 90-day pause on all foreign aid, definitely Israel was exempted. Najee said that Egypt was also exempted, and Ukraine was, nobody knows. Is it possible what? Reach Mars. Oh, Mars. Oh, okay. Right, okay, so the comment was in the inauguration, he said that things are going to be more merit-based, and then the question was, is it possible to reach Mars? Well, I mean, they've already reached Mars with rovers and probes, so Mars is reachable. Now, who wants to reach Mars? That's definitely Elon Musk has that idea, and I'm sure anybody who's a fan of space, that's one of the things that people want to do, get to Mars. But I don't know about inhabitation. I mean, this seems kind of a far-fetched idea, but you know, maybe sometime in the future. You can already get to Mars, so the question really will be, you know, can you get there in large scale, and you get people who want to settle there, and you know, I think you may have that as the next goal. Who knows what NASA hasn't declared their next goals, I don't think. I have a friend who works at NASA. I should ask him before I say these things. But now, as far as merit-based, so that's where you get, you know, the opposite of DEI or you know, diversity goals is that we're going to do things on merit. You know, now that sounds good, but you know, a lot of times the point of diversity you know, programs was that certain people from underprivileged backgrounds, they just don't have the same environment, you know, where they can really compete with somebody who's like coming from an upper middle class background, who can put their kids in the best programs, the best science programs, enrich their education, make them capable of the same things that somebody, you know, maybe from a little bit of a higher income background would be able to, you know, and so whereas if you're coming from a very poor background, there's much more obstacles you have to overcome. So how do we, bridge some of the gap that exists between, the higher income people and the lower income people? And that's one of the positive things you can think of, diversity programs we're trying to achieve. And so definitely going to be lost. Now, how much of an impact that will have, we'll see. I think, unfortunately, I'm not sure how much they'll track that statistically, the federal government. This will be one of the issues that maybe private sector will have to look at. But I think for us, we think we'll do fine with merit, because after all, that was the Asians' claim. The Koreans and Chinese were angry that Harvard wasn't admitting them in large numbers compared to what their actual scores were. But after elimination of the last affirmative action, their numbers actually went down in terms of how many they actually admitted. So I don't think that there's anything like purely merit in any society. There's always, some, as we say in Urdu, sifarish. Exactly. So 100 years of injustice cannot be just replaced by merit. But even if you had no injustice, you have an elite class who's interested in getting their people in certain places, and they give more money as alumni. So they didn't get rid of alumni programs. There were alumni admissions and all these other things, all these advantages. So there's sort of a myth that there's just a pure merit system out there that's going to save everything. But in fact, every time you look at it, there's really so many advantages that certain classes have, rich and the dominant ruling class will have. If you don't give any kind of support to other people, they will eventually, sort of dominate those higher positions. So, I think I come from, my parents came from Pakistan, so they, you see over there that everything is who you know. There's no almost merit. You just, if your uncle knows this person, and so you'll. But even there's a merit system somewhat, but now when you kind of learn more about the American system, the more and more you learn, you said, well, it's very similar facets that are existing here. They're just not apparent, obviously, in the yeah, and so. And anybody, even in the university, when they say why do they have alumni, why do they have fraternities? They said because it's who you know. They want you to link to the people that hire people. And even if you have equal merit, if you have the right links, then you get the job, you get the position sometimes, and many times. So I don't think there's a 100% merit system out there. And so, I think there always should be some kind of force that will uplift people who are on the lower end and give them some, outstanding. But, that's what, you see coming in the next few years, that they're trying to get rid of all those support programs. You want to? I know you were saying something. Yeah. Egypt, yeah. I'm afraid of that. Because this one was a plan for his son-in-law. Yeah, definitely. Before, he had the same plan, but it took years now, and now he had the chance to do it. Yeah, I think anything is possible, so we also should be worried about some of these things, but I don't think it's, at this point, very probable. You would have to say that, you'd have to get Egypt and Jordan on board, and yeah, we have a resistance in Gaza. It's not a good choice, The man, if you give him some money, he probably would do it. Yeah. None of these are. I don't think. Well, I don't think any of these people, these rulers, are really ideologically opposed to any of these things. But there would definitely be some destabilization with large-scale immigration to any country, and So I don't know. That's to be determined, I guess. What he's saying is basically what Trump was saying was basically the words of not only Kushner, his son-in-law, but also Smotrich and some of the right-wing people. They had been saying this for several months. So, he forced them to take the ceasefire. So number one, something that they really hated in the first place, and caused them to leave the government. So that's definitely something he did. I mean, that's an action. The other one is words, and one thing about Trump is he says a lot of words. You don't know all of them, which one of them he actually cares about. Yeah, because he's a talker and he's a showman. So sometimes he says things which he never follows through on, and he's just saying it to say it. So at least the action so far is that he did force the ceasefire through, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Yeah, I mean, I think this was Times of Israel. So he was, Khaled was saying that Hamas is stronger than it was in the past. I mean, they already claimed that they recruited like 18,000 more people. So that was not us. That was, I think the Times of Israel said that. So, I think it was, everybody knows that actually Hamas probably has more members. And of course, all these claims they had, they've destroyed this brigade and that brigade. It was somewhat, they're just trying to claim they're doing something. Obviously, definitely they destroyed lots of things. Gaza has been decimated. But did they destroy Hamas? No, that they did not achieve.
Another question.
Yeah.
Regarding food quality regulations, you mentioned a lot of promises before his inauguration. Robert Jr. Kennedy, remove all the extra preservatives in our food. Has he made any progress on that?
Well, I'm not sure if he's been confirmed yet. Anybody know? RFK? Yeah, so I don't think they've done anything really in that regard so far, although they did eliminate red dye, for something, I can't remember the exact dye number, and that was, big change that has been known for years that it has negative properties and I don't know if that was part of the Biden administration. That might have been the last actions of the Biden administration. But that was done. Yeah, I'm not aware of anything else specific. Like I said, there was 20, 30 pages of stuff that was said, and not all of it is going to be implemented. Several of these things, what he said, you can't really do. You have to, they're more like wish lists and things that he just wrote down, and he has to go through congressional approval, and so some of these are going to be challenged in court, like the birthright citizenship thing, and so it's not like he can just write everything down and it happens. But he has shown that he significantly expanded what the president could do the last administration. He did things which no other president kind of dared to do or even thought they could do. And he got backing from courts and other things. So, I think that was part of the concern of the founders of this country, the imperial presidency, that the president shouldn't become like an emperor or king. And that's why they included all these checks and balances in the system. But what we learned from the last administration is the checks and balances in the president are much less than we thought they were. And especially if you have a compliant party that's supporting you in Congress, and then almost no checks and balances are there. So unfortunately, that allows for fast action for people if they want certain policies to go forward. But it also, has very little you can do other than another election. You can sue, but increasingly, they have also taken, more and more steps to make the judiciary more pro their policies. So we'll see. I think that's, of course, there was a bill, I didn't mention it, that the House passed, or they put forth this bill. I don't think it was passed, but it was put forth to make a constitutional amendment so Trump can have a third term. And he said in one of his speeches, I'm happy to serve you for the second or third or fourth time or something like this. So, he thinks of himself as, you know, he's a king or emperor, and so we'll see. I don't really see that the Republicans will be on board with this, and of course it requires a lot of effort to get it as a constitutional amendment. So, but nonetheless, it was symbolic at least that they put this forward as a bill. Yeah.
Regarding the deportation, we know it's focused more towards the Hispanics, people along that race. But if it were to come to, say, any normal American, I want to say normal, you know, someone who is, birthright to be here, say, by citizenship, if we don't have, say, like an ID and ICE approaches us, what would be some ways to protect ourselves from actually getting deported somewhere else? You mentioned it's easier for them not to harass people, considering the church situation.
Yeah, I mean, God knows what they will do because they have the military, FBI, Homeland Security, task forces, local police. And so I think I'm not the right person to tell you what to do in that regard, but everybody who's told me is don't talk to law enforcement is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10, and say you want your lawyer. Yeah. So anything you say to a law enforcement official, if it's inaccurate, it can be held against you, and it's a crime itself. So you'll never succeed. In fact, I watched this YouTube video by an attorney, a criminal defense attorney. He said, under no circumstances will it ever benefit you to talk to the police. If they're coming to talk to you, there's no, even if you're 100% innocent, there's no benefit you will get from it. He said, if you're 100% innocent, then it'll come out in trial. But what it is that they say that what you say can and will be used against you. It doesn't say can be used for you. And there's a clear, they don't have to tell any of the things you told them that would declare your innocence. And in fact, the opposite, if they're technically a police officer is a servant of the court. So, if they're on the stand testifying that you and him had a private conversation and you told him this, that, and the third, who are they going to believe? The police, So don't talk to the police ever, is what an attorney, this is an attorney told it. And I think it's great advice. Unless you're telling them about some crime you saw or something. But if they're coming to talk to you about something, then, it's very rare that you ever want or will get anything of positive from talking to them. And definitely if you're a suspect, you need to ask them, am I a suspect in a crime? Because there's actually, he mentioned that there's, and we gotta stop, but he said people don't even know, even lawyers don't know how many federal regulations there are. Like, there's a debate, 70,000, 80, these laws, there's so many laws on the books that even the lawyers themselves don't know how many laws there are. So you don't think that they can find some law that you've violated? Everybody has violated some law. It's like you brought Apple from overseas. You violated a law. There's also, he mentioned all these crazy examples, and I was like, yeah, really, everybody's violated some law. So if they want to get you, they'll get you, but don't incriminate yourself. And somebody, why they ask you when they pull you over, the police, do you know why I pulled you over? Because he wants you to tell, so you've declared your guilt. So even when they pull you over, say, I don't know, you tell me, or something like that. Don't incriminate yourself, because ultimately it's not about guilt or innocence. If you're guilty, then most people, it comes out in trial, and there's a deal that you cut. So it's not like the guilty are getting free, but it's the innocent people that will get harassed, and when you talk to police, that you'll get stuck. So don't do it, and INS is part of that same thing. And you don't have to have an ID, at least currently, so you don't have to show anybody any ID. But who knows the future, Like I said, there are people that are captured off the street. They're citizens. They took them and deported them, and then they're stuck in Mexico or other countries. And it's only because the Hispanics are the most number of immigrants that have come here, that many undocumented, that they will be more the focus. But it's really all of us who are anybody who they think of as foreigner will be their target. So I don't think we're just small in numbers, but that's a matter of quantity, not quality. You had a question? All right. About the what? The winner? Mm, winter what? Boots. Mm, I don't know about that, but it's also 9 o'clock, so we promise we will get out of here by then. So I do have to stop, but I'll look into it. I don't know. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Maybe. Does anybody else know? No. Yeah. سبحانك اللهم نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته